Want help to grow your business? Download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.
Welcome to Grow Your Business. I'm Muffy Churches, and in this session we're going to have a look at 5 ways to ensure results through performance management. Now, if you've decided to lock into this particular video, I'm going to assume that you're probably a business leader, and that as a business leader, you've got a very clear vision and some strategies for how you choose to take your products and or your services to market. You probably are also very well aware of the array of methodologies that are at your disposal to make that happen. Now, when it comes to your workforce, we need to have the same strategy, the same level of vision, and the same understanding of methodologies in place. Because the most successful businesses have cultures, have workforce cultures that have visions that align to the vision and the strategy of the company. Performance management is one of the components of having a group, a workforce that is able to do that. So together today, what we'll cover is we'll have a look in general. This will be very high level. This will be sort of a 101 version of what performance management is all about. We'll define it together. We'll have a look at its benefits and values, because it's if you're going to take the time and the expense and put the effort into setting up a performance management system, you probably want to be really clear about what the benefits will be for you. We'll also look at the components, so that's what it's made up of, and also implementation. So if you're tempted to go ahead and put one of these systems together, I've got some key thoughts for you to sort of consider. And lastly, we'll have a look at the human factor. So, you know, the individual performance management is all based on feedback and trying to grow and improve performance levels, and there's a human being behind that. So we'll be having a look at their heart and soul and their sensitivity to feedback and best ways to approach things like that. So first of all, we'll start with defining performance management for you. And I think one of the best ways to do this is to start by thinking about a car. And when we drive a car, we're in full control. We step into the car, we know what destination we want to reach. We have control over the distance, we have control over the speed, we have control over the traction, and we make all those decisions quickly in our heads, and we reach our destination no problem. In a sense, performance management is very much the same. You want to make sure that you have all of those capabilities with your team, your group, your workforce full of people. So we've got 3 things that we'll cover in this section, and that is we'll have a look at the what does it give me, what's the purpose of performance management if I set up the system, and what are the components and the methodologies involved. And again, this will be on a high level at this point, because we'll cover some of these things in more detail a little bit later. So let's start with purpose. What is performance management trying to do for us? If we go back to that car analogy, if we were able to take our car in once a week, we wouldn't, but if we were to, once a week to the mechanic would put the car up on a hoist and it would check it to see what parts of it are running really well, what parts of that car need to be tuned up, what parts of that car perhaps need to be replaced, and also they'd be looking at it to see if the car is legally roadworthy. Well, if we use that analogy on our workforce, it's very much the same. There are 4 things that we're looking to try to accomplish. The first is we want to be able to have constant feedback on performance levels, how people are going, where they need to be developed and where they're doing just fine. We also want to be able to identify the top performers, the real stars of the business, because they're the ones that we want to make sure we hold on to, promote and reward, so that we hold their intellectual property and their capability as long as possible. Thirdly, we probably want to be able to weed out the performers that aren't working as well as we'd like them to be able to work. So they're the ones that might be hanging hard on on the system that are slowing the workforce down. They need to be specially developed and or perhaps managed out of the business. And lastly, performance management systems also give us a means of being able to collect the data that we might need in the unfortunate circumstance that there's a law case against the organization. If someone's dismissed and they see it to be an unfair dismissal, performance management systems are a good way to hold data in secure places on the computer. We've got plenty of notes and details, so you can use those details if you need to later as a defense. So a negative point, but also very important for any business. So I'd like to share with you, I think, a case study that is an interesting one. When performance management systems work well, they serve their purpose and they're worth their value. So here's a story about an organization. It was a women's clothing retail chain, mostly women working for it, of course. One of the key leaders in the organization had the responsibility of trying to hire a new HR manager. Actually, I think it was an HR director. And he went out and he found some candidates and he picked one in particular, interviewed him, quite happy with him, ran him through 4 different interviews with different people within the organization. He handled that just fine. The CV looked red like flying colors. And when they made the final call to the last employer to find out what the reference was like, it was glowing. So they hired him, put him in place. Now, because this organization was really good about setting up a solid performance management system, this leader who had hired the HR director was really pedantic about making sure that he kept an eye on this individual for the first 3 months, because you've got that 3-month experimental period. So he was walking around in the first week or two, getting some feedback, finding out how people were working with him, and he could see quickly in the first 2 weeks that things weren't going well. This was an individual that just wasn't comfortable working with women, and I think they with him as well for some reason. So he could see that they had trouble lurking. He collected data, he collected feedback details, and when it reached the 3-month point, he had an assessment with the other senior leaders, and they made the decision to let him go. Now, further down the track, when sort of through the grapevine, he heard that the last business that had hired this person had actually not been totally forthcoming or honest about how this person had worked with them. They'd held the truth back. They'd had trouble with him as well. And in fact, when they found that he was going to apply for this particular role, they knew it wouldn't be a great fit. But they hadn't been open about it, probably because they wanted to make sure that this man was able to find another job. But what we're saying here is that the value of performance management is terrific, because in this case they were able to let him go and in that first 3-month period, whereas had they kept him on, had they not had the system and the feedback in place early on, had the leader not actually taken the responsibility of being very proactive about researching things, they probably would have been stuck with a difficult individual for a year or two. It could have caused tremendous problems. So that's a great story for how performance management can work. Let's look as well at, just on a very high level, at the components of performance management. What does it contain? So essentially we're looking at 3 sort of buckets of components, and I'd say the first one is measurements. The second one would be appraisals, and the third bucket of components would be staff development. Now, if we go back and look at each one of those very quickly, because I'll cover some of these later for you as well. In terms of measurements, we're looking at things like ratings and sort of score charts, maybe even 360-degree feedback, where you administer a questionnaire and feedback comes through, those sorts of things. Measurements meaning things that you can put in numbers and rate, right, and rank. In terms of appraisals, that is the human side of things. That's where you have meetings between individuals using the rankings, the ratings, or the measurements that you've been able to accumulate. And so if you've got, sometimes you have an appraisal that's just a one-on-one. It might be the manager dealing with the direct report. Sometimes it's a group of leaders having a conversation about a direct report or a group of workers, whatever it is. But those appraisals can be formal, they can be informal, they could be coaching and all sorts of things contained in that one particular bucket. Now the third bucket, again, which was developing staff, that is all about the mentoring, the coaching, the provision of feedback, and the training up of staff, all the things that happen in that specific space. Now what's interesting, you can hear that there's a lot of variation in these areas, and what we know is that many organizations actually don't use any. They don't use any performance management at all. In fact, I think it's about 48% don't have one in place, a system in place, which is really interesting. Others have a combination of things. Some have just some measurements that they use ad hoc. Some have meetings that are formal or informal. You know, some train and have a full-on LMS system, and others don't. So it's up to the organization to work out what strategy or what system is going to work well for them. Lastly,
to continue enjoying this presentation, download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.